Here now we have the skeleton of a seabird. I'm pretty sure this is also a fulmar, although this is a different individual than the one that we dissected to look at the internal organs. Fortunately, I found it pretty clean on the beach, so we can start to look at the skeletal morphology a little bit. And it's going to kind of come apart here. It's pretty fragile, but I'll kind of show you the different parts. And we can start, well, let's start with the skull. So here you can see the bird's skull. Unlike our skull, it doesn't have nearly as many plates in the head, so kind of a uniform brain case here. This individual, it had been drying on the beach for a while. Let me move this so that you don't have as much problem in the background. You can actually see the bony covering here coming off. So the bird's bill is bone with kind of this horny keratinous sheath on it. So I don't know if you can see I'm kind of peeling that off there. That's the horny part on the top. And you can see the underlying bone. Now this, being a Procelariformes, has the tube nose, and here you can see that tube is actually made up from that horny sheath. If I pull that back, you can see the open nostrils right underneath. So this is the upper mandible and the lower mandible. Now this individual is pretty well dried, but obviously the lower mandible hinges and they can open the lower mandible. You might see there's this little bone right here kind of coming up along the side of the mouth here that connects the upper mandible. And it's going to be hard for you to see on the video, but there's basically a thin part of the bone here, and this actually has, in a fresh individual, cartilage and some softer tissues that actually acts as a hinge. And so a lot of birds, including these seabirds, can actually pull the upper mandible up. They can basically lift the upper mandible up relative to the skull. And so that gives them a lot of flexibility in their mouth. Now on this side of the skull, you can also make out this ring here, and I haven't really worked all the tissue off there because it would fall apart, but this is actually a bone called the sclerotic ring, made up of a bunch of small little bones actually called sclerotic ossicles, and these give structure and support the eye. So again, you might remember in the fresh specimen how large the eye was. When I pulled the eye out, this was actually on the eye that I pulled out, but this is actually part of the skeleton right here, and basically most of the eye would be down underneath this, but then with the lens of the eye bulging out through here. And so that helps support their very large eyes. Muscles can attach to these bones and allow movement of the eye. So very, very interesting skull. On the underside here, there are these nice thin bones that I'm kind of tugging at there and there. These bones are actually together called the hyoid process. They kind of come together and fuse down here and actually attach to the tongue. And these are actually where the muscles attach that move the tongue. So the muscle attachment is actually on the back of the skull. On woodpeckers, which have really long extensible tongues, these hyoid processes actually extend back over the top of the skull. And in a few species of woodpecker, including the northern flickers that we get here, they actually wrap all the way over the top of the skull, and the muscle attachments are actually at the front of the skull, or in the case of the northern flicker, they'll actually go through the front nostril. So that basically allows them to stick their long tongues out of their bill. Obviously on a seabird, we don't have that need for a super long tongue, so instead we have these much shorter hyoid processes that are much similar to what we would see in most birds. Now you can also see here, this is the attachment point for the spine, right? The spinal cord would go and connect to the brain in here. And you'll see there's one big bump here. That's called the Occipital Condyle. And this is one of the things that separates birds from mammals, is we would have two of these processes here. They just have one big one. All right, so that's the skull. Below that, we now have the cervical vertebrae. So hopefully you guys can see that here. So this is basically the spine on the neck. And you can see very large vertebrae. big attachment points for muscles, so you can see kind of, these big ridges coming off. Birds have very flexible necks, and they use that for, looking around and moving their head, obviously. So most of their flexibility is going to be in these neck vertebrae. Through most of the rest of the body, the vertebrae are fused. So I'll kind of flip this over so we can look at the back. Try not to break it any more than it's already broken here. Okay, so now kind of looking at the spine here, you can see these are the thoracic vertebrae here. They now have these long projections here, and there's usually really tough connective tissue here, which means this part of their body really doesn't flex. It's pretty rigid, and that's important for flight, that their body remain pretty rigid. They don't have a lot of flexibility in their thoracic spine. Here is the pelvis. You can see, again, very fused together, again adding rigidity. And then there's some flexibility here in the tail, but again, not a long bony tail. This is basically within the body of the bird, right? The part that we call the tail are the feathers that attach to this kind of fused bone right here, okay? So earlier we were talking about the pygostyle. This is the bone that forms the pygostyle right there. So very typical for birds to have a lot of fused bones that basically make their body very rigid. Now, while we're looking at the back, you'll also see this bone here. This is the scapula. This is where some of the shoulder muscles attach and give some of the movement to kind of their shoulders here. Now, if we flip this back over, now we can see the breast and ribs, and there's a couple of pretty important bones here. So first, we've got the sternum, okay? Now, on mammals, on us, for example, we have a very flat sternum. Birds, flighted birds, have a keeled sternum. So you can see right here, this is the keel. These are where those major flight muscles attach. So when we did the dissection, I exposed this part of the bone so I could show you the flight muscles. But now you can see, in this case, a very broad surface for muscle attachment. And then I also kind of showed you the ribs on the live specimen. This one isn't flexible, so I can't show you how the chest moves in and out. But again, you can see there's kind of hinge points here and hinge points here that allow, again, that muscle to kind of the breastplate to pump up and down. That's how they ventilate. And then you see these ribs with these long overlapping processes, again, to provide extra support from compression on the sides. So very elaborate kind of rib structure compared to ours. If I move this around to the front, not sure what angle you can see this past that, but this is the furcula, what we commonly call the wishbone. If you guys ever fight over the wishbone at Thanksgiving or something, that's this bone here. And this is a kind of a unique structure here that basically acts like a spring in birds that fly. So as they pump their wings down, there's tension on that bone. It acts kind of like a spring, and that energy then can be used to bring the wings back up as they fly. So that's the furcula there. Now, if we look at the wings, bring one wing up here. So here you can start to see the entirety of the wing, very long wings on these seabirds. And we'll start way out here. So these bones here are, I believe, the metacarpals. So that would be akin to kind of our wrist bones. And hand bones, and then these are actually the flanges out here, so kind of what would be akin to our finger bones. On this wing, you can just barely see it. So basically all of the digits are fused here. So this would be considered the first digit, and then there's a little tiny bone right here that's the second digit. And that second digit is actually what controls the alula. So when we looked at the wing morphology, we talked about the feathers they could bring up to increase or to change airflow at low speeds. That's that bone right there. So this is basically their hand, or these are the fingers. This whole thing is their hand. Then we've got the radius and ulna, so this is akin to our forearm. So remember, the primary feathers are attached to these bones out here. The secondaries are attached to this long bone here, and I doubt you can see this in the screen, but I can actually feel the little bumps along the bone where the individual secondary feathers would attach. And then we have the humerus. This would be, you know, analogous to our upper arm here, one big bone, and this is again where the major flight muscles attach. So a lot of musculature to this bone. This is, you know, what is running to the plate here, so you can see these broad processes here at the edge of the bone for all that muscle to attach. They have a particular tendon called a strap that kind of wraps around and attaches here. That's for lifting the wing, and then the pectoralis comes up here and attaches directly here, and that's for the downstroke of the wing. So that's how they pull the wing up and down. So there we've got the wing of this bird. Now if I show you the other wing, here, hopefully you guys can see this okay. It's kind of hard to give you guys contrast here. You can actually see this is that second digit sticking out right there. Got his thumbs up there. It's not really the thumb, but it's you know, the second finger. This is the bone that they use to control the alula that's sticking out on that one. Okay, then if we look at legs, and the tendons on this bird really tightened up, so the legs are kind of in a funky shape, but I'll do my best to show you. So again, bring this around. Here, this bone here is the femur. Okay, so that's the upper leg. This bone here is what we call the tibiotarsus, and this is basically what would be akin to our shin bone. Okay, then below the tibiotarsus, we have the hypotarsus. So this is basically, you know, so this would be akin to our knee, this would be akin to our ankle. These are the fused foot bones, and then what we call the bird foot is, you know, here are the phalanges. These would actually be analogous to our finger bones. And on this particular bird, they have a pretty reduced hallux. I don't see the hallux on this foot. Well, here, it's present on this foot. So this foot's really tightened here, but here is the, right here where my forceps are pointing, is the hallux, and then the three forward-pointing digits, right, the three forward-pointing phalanges. And so that forms the bird foot. So this is from, I'm pretty sure, a fulmar, so similar to the one we dissected. I have a few other bones from a couple other seabirds I picked up while I was on the beach. Just get his knee out of his rib cage and try to preserve that. I'll move that to the side. This, I'm pretty sure, is from a seagull. So again, this is the breastplate, and here you can see a really huge long keel. So in this case, gulls weigh a lot more. They need much bigger muscles to get into flight. So you can see very massive attachment point there. And then again, big furcula here. So you can see that furcula really clearly on this bird. This is that wishbone structure. This one, the rib cage is broken, but you can see the rib bones would be much larger. So this is a pretty big bird. Not sure, 100% sure what species this is from, but obviously different from this one, which had the much more short breastbone sternum. And then this, again, I don't know what this is from. can't tell from the feet. But this is, again, kind of the spine. So this is kind of thoracic spine, lumbar spine, and then hip bone here. And again, this is just showing you, how much fusion there is in the hip bone. So, it's pretty much one solid plate. And again, with all the processes up here in the lumbar and thoracic spine, their back really isn't that flexible. Again, some flexibility in the tail, but most of their flexibility for looking around is up in their neck area. And again, now you can see the leg bones here. In this case, there's still some skin remaining here, so you can kind of see how the leg turns here into the feet. So again, just to orient you, this would basically be analogous to our upper leg and thigh. This would be analogous to our lower leg, kind of like our shin. So this is actually the bird's knee. This would be analogous to the ankle. Now in birds, though, this is the major joint that you see, when they're walking. In most birds, this joint is actually covered by the feathers, so you don't actually see the bird knee. So the backward bend that you see in birds when they're walking would be analogous to our ankle, with the foot and phalanges down here forming the lower part of the leg and foot on a bird. If you guys are meat eaters, right? If you eat drumsticks, that's up here. That's where all the musculature is. Everything down here is controlled by tendons that attach to the muscles up here. And that's, again, important for birds because that helps them maintain their center of gravity closer to their body, right? They don't want these big heavy legs hanging out. So this is kind of where the muscle is, the meat. And then out here, this is all controlled through tendons that attach to muscles up here. And that's similar to the arrangement in their wings. So kind of showing you this wing again, right? If you eat chicken wings or whatever, this is where you're getting the meat. You get a little bit off here, but this is mostly just skin, and there's nothing but tendon extending beyond that. So some smaller muscles here, some bigger muscles here, and then the breast muscles are mostly what powers flight, with movements out here controlled by the smaller muscles along these bones, with long tendons that run out to the outer digits. So that's the bird skeleton. So finally, let's take a look at the structure of the bone itself. So here I have a femur from bird, so this is the upper leg bone, and I basically cut it longitudinally so that we can look at the internal structure. And bird bones are famously hollow. This makes them much lighter, but they have a lot of unique structures to make sure that they're still strong structures for the birds. So let's zoom in a little bit. And we'll start by looking here towards the end of the bone. You guys can see kind of within the bone it's hollow, but it has all of these struts. And the struts in there really give the bone a lot more rigidity. So they prevent the bone from flexing despite it being hollow, and makes the bones provide a lot of strength and support. As we move down the bone, you can see that it's hollow throughout. And while that hollowness is primarily there for weight savings, it does mean that there's some space in here for other functions as well. This is a leg bone, so there probably isn't much in here, but certainly in some of the larger bones at the base of the wing, there's actually some of the air sacs will actually go into the hollow bone structure themselves. Now, as we get to the other end here, you do see there's a little bit of dry tissue in here, right in kind of where the joint is. In mammal bones, we know that our bones are filled with bone marrow, and this is where we have a lot of our blood production. Birds do have bone marrow, but obviously it would kind of defeat the purpose of having hollow bones if you filled it with bone marrow. But that tissue you see in there is the bone marrow. So the bone marrow in birds tends to be located near the joints of larger bones like this femur. All right, we'll zoom in just a little more here, look at kind of the fine tail structure here. And one of the kind of unique aspects of avian bone is that the bone material itself is actually denser than similar mammalian bone. So if you kind of look at the walls of the bone here, you can see it's very dense and smooth. If you look at just the bone material itself, the material is denser, so it's heavier than mammalian bone, and again, that adds strength. But now you have this kind of overall hollow bone with struts, meaning that the overall bone isn't any heavier than mammalian bone. A lot of people think that the bones themselves are lighter. Size for size, the bird bones aren't really much lighter than mammalian bone, but they are stronger for a given weight. So that means you can end up with kind of smaller bones serving to support greater weight bearing or strength bearing. So pound for pound, you get more out of bird bone in terms of strength than you would out of mammalian bone for similarly sized mammals.